In the lengthy email criticizing the show, Tyson wrote that the show promoted negative sexual stereotypes of black people and that students should have been smarter about putting on such a show. Black people, throughout history, both in the United States and abroad, have been subject to repeated hypersexualized stereotypes and complete and total physical objectification, she wrote. And now we're doing it to ourselves. I guess I was hoping we were all smart enough not to buy into that bullshit. Tyson said that she used the term bullshit in reference to the sexually exploitive behavior. Tyson, who works at a Boston area rape crisis center and a girls' detention center, wrote that young African American women need role models.
According to her LinkedIn page, she spoke at colleges, high schools, juvenile detention centers, and the Boston Public Health Commission about sexual abuse and incest. In March 2005, Tyson spoke at the Massachusetts State House alongside Lieutenant Governor Carrie Healy and other advocates lobbying for survivors of sexual assault. At the event, Tyson recalled being sexually abused by her father. "It took a long time for me to trust men and to learn to trust the world around me," Tyson said at the State House. According to the Lawrence Eagle Tribune, no child should have to suffer in silence the way I did.
I was working as a survivor speaker for the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center. You came to town. There was a benefit for the Rape Crisis Center where you were our honored guest. And that is how we met.
We have similar stories, you and I.
Very similar stories. I'm an incest survivor. My father was convicted when I was 8 years old on 11 different counts of child molestation. The problem is that people don't want to hear the message, so we just gotta get a little louder.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And more of us.
And there needs to be more of us. Like,
yeah, so
build the numbers, keep the message going, do what we have to do until they start seeing us.
All of that. But I think, Connecticut is a special beast, as is most of New England. And while I loved my many years in Boston, especially because I had fabulous friends,
because I had been working, I was one of the founding members of the Survivor Speakers Bureau for the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center. And I had toured all over New England. My father is a convicted pedophile. And
That's a thing to drop in conversation.
Sorry, I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Whatever. But so I was I toured all over New England talking about what had happened to me as a child and how it had affected me, as a kid, how it affected me as an adult and all this stuff. But one of the places that I liked most when I was sent to talk was actually at this girls' detention center.
Three women who have accused President Trump of sexual misconduct spoke out at a press conference today calling for a congressional investigation. Here's accuser Rachel Crooks during today's press conference.
That we will hold Mr. Trump to the same standard as Harvey Weinstein and the other men who were held accountable for their reprehensible behavior. Therefore, I ask that Congress put aside their party affiliations and investigate Mr. Trump's history of sexual misconduct.
Vanessa Tyson is an assistant professor at Scripps College, and she's with us now to talk about this press conference and a possible congressional investigation. Why the women didn't come forward earlier, I guess, is one of the points Daniel was making.
And I think I can speak to that at least. What I've noticed with survivors, and I helped found the Survivor Speakers Bureau for the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center back in 2002, is that usually you don't want to think about it, and usually it isn't a story that necessarily is going to carry much weight. In many cases.
Professor Tyson will spend the 2018 to 19 academic year at CASBS working on a book about sexual violence against women and children.
Around this time, during late fall of 1994, my panic attack started. I willingly kissed someone for the first time, and this one small act unleashed a tidal wave of emotions coupled with flashbacks to years of terror from my youth. I don't remember how early the sexual abuse started, in part because the abuse started so very early on in my life. I remember being very young, maybe 3 years old, and completely terrified of going to his house. When I was 8 years old, he was convicted of double-digit counts of felony child molestation. In later years of both college and graduate school, I sought out the means to fix myself. I read every book I could find on trauma and childhood sexual abuse. I utilized the counseling resources available to me while at various institutions of higher education. In the winter of 2003, while in graduate school in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I became one of the founding members of the Survivor Speakers Bureau of the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center. At 26 years old, I began to speak publicly about the realities of child sex abuse.
Movement politics relies heavily on the numbers. A large enough group of people must participate in order for a movement to gain and sustain momentum over time.
Sometimes you have to lead by example, no matter how hard it is.
In fact, her lawyer said after she released her statement, that was the last she would be speaking on the subject. Live here.
You just mentioned that you are a survivor speaker, that you work at a rape crisis center.
Yes.
You were a survivor of what?
Of incest.
Was Justin aware of this in your past?
Actually, yes, actually.
You had shared that with him?
Yes.
You felt comfortable enough sharing that with him even though you had just met him?
Here's the thing. What I was doing for the Rape Crisis Center was actually probably the biggest part of my life at that time.